Hi, I'm Kaya.
And I'm Joanna.
And this is Starlit Citadel Reviews.
Imperial Settlers is an empire-building card game from Ignacy Trzewiczek and Portal Games.
In Imperial Settlers, each player represents a world power looking to build the largest, wealthiest, and most productive empire. It's playable by 2 to 4 players in about an hour. The first expansion, Why Can't We Be Friends, allows players to customize their faction decks with new cards. The second expansion, Atlanteans, adds a new faction and adds new cards to the existing game.
Players begin Imperial Settlers by choosing one of the 4 factions and taking its board, deck, and token. They place the scoreboard on the table and add their tokens and the round marker to it, shuffle the common deck, and place it in the center of the table. The tokens go on the table and a starting player is chosen. Then each player draws 2 common cards and 2 cards from their faction deck. Then the game begins.
A game of Imperial Settlers has 5 rounds, and each round has 4 phases. In the lookout phase, each player draws the top card from their faction deck, and then a number of common cards are drawn from the common deck equal to the number of players plus 1. These cards are laid out face up on the table.
Starting with the first player, everyone chooses 1 card in clockwise order. The leftover card is discarded, and this process is then repeated in reverse order so that each player ends up with 3 new cards. There is no hand limit.
In the production phase, players collect the goods that their empire produces. These may come from their faction board, their production locations, or from their deals. If a player's empire produces cards, they can draw them from either the common deck or their faction deck.
In the action phase, players take turns performing a single action. So you can perform as many actions as you'd like over the course of a round, and you can take the same action more than once. Once you're done taking actions, you pass. And a player who's passed cannot be affected by the actions of any other player that round.
As an action, you can build 1 location from your hand by paying the cost on its upper left. Gold can be spent in place of other resources. To build a faction card with a house symbol in its cost, you have to discard one of your existing locations. The new location is placed next to your faction board in one of 3 rows depending on its type. Faction locations go to the left of the board and common locations go to the right.
Production locations immediately give you the goods they list and will produce them again each production phase. Feature locations provide an ongoing bonus or provide goods in exchange for specific actions. Action locations can be used elsewhere in the action phase. Some locations also have a build bonus, which you collect immediately after building them.
You can make a deal by paying 1 food, taking a faction card from your hand, and placing it under the top edge of your board with the deal section showing. You immediately collect the good it provides, and it will produce that good in future rounds.
You can raise a common card from your hand by spending 1 raise token, and then discarding the card and collecting the goods listed in its upper right. You can also raise a common location from an opponent's empire by spending 2 raise tokens. You collect the goods it provides, and its owner flips the card over and collects 1 wood. The face-down location becomes a foundation, and can be spent in later turns to build faction locations with a house cost.
Every player gets 1 defense token during production, which they can place on a common location. The raise cost of this common location goes up to 3 raise tokens.
You can activate an action location by placing the goods or workers it requires on its card and taking the action it lists. An action location can be used once per round unless stated otherwise. You can also spend workers at a rate of 2 to 1 to collect wood, stone, food, or cards. Spending workers counts as an action, but you can spend more than 2 at a time.
Once every player has passed, the cleanup phase begins. Players can use any storage abilities that they have, and then they discard any goods or tokens they have left. The first player token is passed clockwise, and the next round begins.
The game ends after 5 rounds. Players collect victory points for the locations in their empire according to the number of stars listed on their cards, and they add these to the points that they earned over the course of the game. The player with the most points wins.
So I really enjoyed Imperial Settlers. This is a really fast and simple game, especially for a civilization game. So this is a game in which you're building an empire, you're creating production locations, you're sort of building a large tableau in front of you, which is quite complex in its interactions, but it's really fast and really simple, and that's kind of rare for that kind of game. Also, I love the combination of strategies that are going on here. So not only are you creating a tableau with a lot of engine building going on, so you're putting cards together that work nicely to generate victory points or resources, and you're being really careful about which ones you raise and which ones you make deals out of and which ones you put down, and there's a lot of strategy there. But also, there's a lot of interaction. So it's not like you're just sort of building your own empire in front of you and playing multiplayer solitaire. There's a lot of player interaction, direct conflict. You're gonna really get into each other's empires and mess with other players at the table, especially if you're playing the barbarians. Now, that is a bit of a negative for some groups. So the conflict is definitely present in this game. So if you play with a group of players who aren't really into conflict or are kind of turned off by direct confrontation in a game, then you might want to be aware of this. And there might be a few elements to this game that they're not really going to enjoy.
Another potential challenge for some players is that there's a bit of a learning curve to the factions themselves. Each of the faction decks is quite different, which means that being familiar with one of them isn't necessarily going to transfer over to skills with the other. So you are going to have to play a couple of games before you get really proficient with the faction that you're currently playing with. The game is quite short, so you can do that relatively quickly, but it can be a little bit rough for a beginner coming into a game with experienced players, and it's definitely worth being aware of that fact. Now, that uniqueness of the factions is one of my favorite things about this game because it gives you not only a ton of replayability, since once you get bored of playing with one faction, you can just switch to playing with another, but also a ton of thematic value and immersion. I love how different not only the mechanics involved in each faction are, but also how different their empire becomes and how differently it evolves over the course of the game. The Romans are really good at building, so you're going to end up with a big, elaborate tableau with lots of really cool buildings in it. If you're the Japanese, they're much more involved in trade, and you may find yourself actually placing cards in other people's tableaus, and otherwise kind of getting your fingers into all of the empires rather than just staying close to home. And if you're, say, the barbarians, you're just going to build up a giant horde of workers and then send them out to raise the countryside. So there's a ton of uniqueness, and it really lends itself to making this a very engaging and very immersive game, which is key to civilization builders. The other thing that really helps with that immersion is the art. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous little game. The components are really high quality, but the art itself is just, it's so damn charming. This is the cutest game that I've seen since probably Dungeon Pets. And there's so much care and love and attention that's gone into designing every single one of the cards and really bringing a lot of life to the empire that you build. That visual design is also very thoughtful in that it really helps with the playability of the game. All of the cards are really clear and easy to read. There's never any ambiguity as to what the symbols mean or what a particular mechanic does. And I really want to call attention to that, given that this is a Portal game, and they've sometimes had difficulty with the clarity of their rulebooks, partly because they're translations, and partly, I think, because their strengths often lie elsewhere. This is by far the clearest and easiest to learn game that I've seen from Ignacy Trzewiczek, and that combined with the strength of its gameplay and its theme means it's one of my favorite games of the year.
We are the Great Roman Legion, culturally superior in every...